All right. And we are live. YouTube alive. This is my podcast. I am Paco Power, and I'm here. What are we going to be doing today? We're listening to whatever the hell. If you have join, you can. But we're all here, and let's have some fun. Let's see what I can put up. Maybe I can put up some stuff on the videos. I just so so yeah, it's gonna be fun. Let's do this shit. So I went to the racetrack. So weekend was at Echo Raceway and Americans. Wow, it's been 7 years since the last time I went to the Pan American. I'll tell you what a what a difference, man. What a difference. Way faster. It's 5 seconds. I hadn't seen 5 seconds yet. Can't remember what the cars were running back when but I don't think they were running low sixes. I think they were like mid sixes or something like that. Yeah, I don't think they were running anywhere close to 5 seconds. And now I believe the fastest was 5.6. And it was a hose came off the whiskey hose came off of the turbo, and it climbed to over 137 pounds of boost. So yeah, it ran pretty good, over 260 mile an hour. That is amazing for a six-cylinder. A six-cylinder. I'm talking funny car numbers. Where's the end? Where does it end? I don't know. I tell you what, I know if I had unlimited money and a CNC machine, I would build a motor that would run that. Absolutely. You see, I studied cars like no other my entire life. I love tuning them. I studied the physics of it, the science of it, uh, the history of it, everything about engines, and I consider myself to be pretty good. I wish I had the opportunity to show it, because I don't have money. Like I don't have any money. So, but you give me a year and a good amount of money, not even a year, shit, not even a year, maybe 6 months. Actually, building a motor takes a minute. And I'm talking about making it myself. I guess I could draw it out and I wonder, yeah, you guys can see it. Okay, let's see. Okay. Wait, 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 wait. Hey, wait. Oh, tell them I say hi. I'll be right out. So, I don't even know how to make ad file. You know what I mean? certain things it's not easy to put results into reality or into paper or to explain somebody what we're thinking. Just explain it. It's difficult, because we think so damn fast. I don't know. I think our language could be better. And it's one of the things that Elon Musk is trying to fix is our communication skills. Because of some reason. I would, first of all, it would have to be a 6-line engine. That is a balanced engine. So, 6-line engine. Let me see something. What makes a 6-line balance? I'm not sure it's out and in strip. And it has pistons 1 and 6. The other 4 pistons evenly spaced at 120. So you pretty much have 4 pistons completely. See if I can put it up. Let's see.
All the page, they have all these stamps back. Crazy. Bring some swag to it. Yeah. I love how you can just click it right there. Sound. Everything.
So then try to his
This fucking guy.
That means stroke meters. That is up the center to center of 8 which means that when we rotate half 9 half stroke. The piston should also half of the stroke distance. In our case, it means that the piston should cover 38.5 millimeters to be at half of the stroke, when the crankshaft is also at half of the stroke. Yet, as you can hear, it covers more than half of the stroke during the first 90 degrees of the crankshaft's rotation. So, why is this happening? It doesn't seem logical. Well, it actually is pretty logical, and the reason behind this is that the piston is connected to the crankshaft by a connecting rod. And unlike the piston up and move, the connecting rod does not. In fact, the connecting rod steps out from a linear vertical path of movement, and it moves both left and right away from the movement path of the piston. This means that when the piston is at top dead center, the distance between the piston and the center of the crankshaft equals the length of the connecting rod plus the length of the crank rope. But when we rotate the crankshaft 90 degrees, the length of the crank throw in relation to the piston pin now equals 0, because the crank throw now sits in a horizontal position. But the length of the connecting rod has also changed in relation to the piston pin, because the connecting rod now sits at an angle. Its length is actually shorter in relation to the piston pin. And this means that during the first 90 degrees of crank rotation, the connecting rod actually pulls down the piston a greater distance. But from 90 degrees, the bottom dead center, the connecting rod again returns to its fully vertical position in relation to the piston pin, which means that from 90 degrees, the bottom dead center, distance needs to be covered, then from top dead center to 90 degrees. So this covers a greater distance during the top 180 degrees of the crankshaft's rotation than during the bottom 180 degrees. And because the piston covers a greater distance during the same amount of time, it means that the piston actually moves faster in the top half of the crank's rotation than in the bottom half of the crank's rotation. So why am I telling you all this? What does this have to do with engine balance? Well, it has everything to do with engine balance, because the greater the speed of the piston, the greater its inertial force, and the greater the force is exerted on the entire rotating assembly of the engine. Because the piston moves faster in the top half of the crank's rotation, it means that the forces exerted during the top half of the rotation and the bottom half of the rotation are unequal. And what I just explained can be a key source of a potential secondary engine imbalance. What is primary engine balance then? Well, primary engine balance, or a source of a primary engine imbalance, can be an unbalanced mass in your rotating assembly. This means that, put simply, your pistons are usually the greatest source of a primary engine imbalance. For example, an engine with an odd number of pistons can have a primary imbalance if the mass of the odd piston isn't balanced out or cancelled out by the other pistons. What we have to also remember is that primary imbalances occur once per engine rotation, and secondary imbalances occur twice per a single full engine rotation. And usually, primary imbalances are greater in magnitude and more apparent than secondary engine imbalances. So why is engine balance important? Well, it's important because an unbalanced engine is going to run rough, is going to vibrate a lot. And because of this, it's going to wear itself out much faster. Also, a rough running engine is obviously going to negatively impact the comfort of vehicle occupants. It's also going to negatively impact things like engine balance or even vehicle electronics in extreme cases. Also, engine vibrations are wasted energy, which means that an unbalanced engine is less efficient and is never going to perform as well as a smooth running balanced engine. And today we're going to take a look at the most popular inline engine configurations in automotive applications to see how well each of them is actually balanced. And we're starting with the one with the least number of cylinders, the inline 3-cylinder engine. Now, when it comes to inline 3-cylinder engines, almost all of them are going to have 120 degrees of separation between their individual crankshaft throws. This kind of crank throw angle enables an even distribution of crank throw along the crankshaft, and this then enables an even firing interval for the inline 3-cylinder engine. Now, in addition to the section, even firing interval is a key factor of a smooth running balanced engine. Now let's figure out how often does the inline 3-cylinder fire. And to figure that out, we have to do a pretty simple calculation. We just gotta divide 720 by 3. 720 is actually 2 times 360. We're using this number because we're talking about 4-stroke engines here. And a 4-stroke engine needs 2 full revolutions to complete a combustion cycle. Hence, 720. Number 3 is simply the number of cylinders of the engine. And the result of this is 240. And this tells us that an inline 3-cylinder engine fires every 240 degrees of crankshaft rotation. Now what we can do next is that we can take 240 and deduct 180 from this number. We're using 180 because 180 is the number of crank degrees needed to complete a single engine stroke. And the result of this number is 60. And this tells us that during a full crankshaft revolution, 60 degrees of inline 3 are actually without a power stroke. In other words, during 60 degrees of crankshaft revolution, the inline 3 is quote-unquote silent. And this gap in power strokes means that the inline 3 has an uneven power delivery, which is one of the key reasons for the lack of smoothness from an inline 3-cylinder engine. So what about the primary and secondary balance of the inline 3-cylinder engine? Well, the odd number of pistons in an inline 3 might make you think that it's unbalanced when it comes to its primary forces, but it's actually not really the case. Because the pistons are evenly spaced across the crankshaft, the engine has a good primary balance as a whole, and because the crank throws are also evenly spaced out, we get a cancellation between the pistons. Although there's an odd number of them, they're actually canceling each other out when it comes to their overall mass. But if your gut feeling is telling you there's gotta be something wrong when it comes to the primary balance of an odd number of pistons, well, you're right. And to observe what's wrong with the primary balance of an inline 3-cylinder engine, we have to draw a line across its middle. And what we can observe is that the forces on this side are unequal to the forces on the other side. And they again become unequal as the inline 3-cylinder moves. The force inequality is constantly being shifted from the front to the back of the engine. And the inline 3 actually rocks front to back as it's running. So although the pistons are evenly spaced across the crank, and although the even distribution of crank throws ensures that the masses of the pistons cancel each other out and that the engine is balanced as a whole, the inline 3-cylinder still has a primary imbalance in relation to its center of gravity. And this results in a rocking moment front to back. And this rocking moment is the reason why the inline 3-cylinder engine isn't really famous for being a very smooth engine. So how do we fix this? How do we get rid of this primary imbalance? Well, the way to fix imbalances in most reciprocating piston engines is to use balancing shafts. We simply get a shaft that rotates together with the engine, and the shaft cancels out the imbalance of the engine. And because we're trying to fix a imbalance in the case of we're going to use a inline have. In fact, most engine designers are going to try hard to avoid the use of balancing shaft in their design. This is because balancing shafts add cost, weight, and friction, and nobody wants that, of course. And today we have many examples of inline 3-cylinder engines that do not have balancing shafts in them, but still run pretty smooth thanks to the usage of clever engineering. An example is Ford's 1-liter 3-cylinder EcoBoost engine. It's a pretty smooth engine for an inline 3-cylinder engine, and it has no balancing shafts. Instead, clever tricks like unbalanced flywheels and crank pulleys, as well as cleverly engineered engine mounts to make a pretty smooth engine despite its low number of cylinders. So what about the secondary balance of the inline 3-cylinder engine? Well, it's actually really good thanks to the even distribution of the crank throws in an inline 3-cylinder engine. The even distribution of crank throws ensures that no two pistons at any one time are in the same part of their stroke when the inline 3-cylinder engine is running. At any point during the crankshaft operation, all three pistons are going to be in different parts of their stroke. And this means that the unequal forces associated with the top and bottom half of the crankshaft rotation are actually cancelling each other out in the case of the inline 3-cylinder engine, and the inline 3 has a perfect secondary balance. Now let's add one more cylinder to the line and observe the engine balance of the inline 4-cylinder. Probably the most popular and plentiful engine configuration in the world when it comes to cars. Now, unlike the inline 3-cylinder engine, the inline 4 cannot use 120 degrees of separation between individual crank throws. If we were to add a fourth crank throw at another 120 degrees, the result would be a very unbalanced engine. So instead, the inline 4 has to settle for a different distribution of crank throws, and the result is that the first and the fourth crank throw are 180 degrees separated from the second and third crank throw of a typical inline 4 crankshaft. And the result is that when we're observing the inline 4 crank from the front, it's a much smaller shape compared to the inline 3's Mercedes-like shape. To figure out how often an inline-4 engine fires, we simply have to again divide 720 by 4. 4 is our number of cylinders in this case, and the result is 180. This means that the inline-4 fires every 180 degrees of rotation of the crankshaft. If we deduct 180 from 180, the result is of course 0. And this tells us that there's 0 degrees of crankshaft rotation during which the inline-4 is without a power stroke. In other words, the inline-4 is always on a power stroke. When one power stroke ends, the next one begins, and so on. This means that the inline-4 is in this respect better than the inline-3, and it results in a smoother power delivery from the inline-4 than from the inline-3. Also, like the inline-3, the inline-4 is a perfect primary balance. We have an even number of pistons this time, and as we can see, the pistons move in pairs. The outer two pistons cancel out the inner two pistons, and vice versa. Even if we draw a line across the middle of the inline-4, we can see that the inline-4 is perfectly balanced in relation to its center of gravity. The forces on this side are equal to the forces on the other side. Now, looking at the inline-4 in this position, what do you think? What's the secondary balance like? How good is it? Yeah, when it comes to the secondary balance, the inline-4 kinda sucks. As we can see, when two pistons are at the top, the other two pistons are at the bottom. This means that forces associated with the unequal speeds at the top and the bottom half of the crank's rotation only present in inline-4. In fact, they're augmented by the fact that the pistons move in pairs. So how do we fix the balance? We're balancing shafts again, of course, but this time we're trying to fix a secondary imbalance. That means that for the inline-4, we need two balancing shafts that are rotating at twice the speed of the crank. This is because forces associated with secondary imbalances occur twice per a single full engine revolution. Examples of inline-4s with balancing shafts would be the 4G63 from Mitsubishi and the Mazda MZR engine. But again, there are many inline-4s out there that do not have any sort of balancing shafts on them. One of the reasons behind this is that the magnitude of secondary imbalances is usually smaller and less apparent than the magnitude of primary imbalances. This is especially true in the case of small displacement engines, which have smaller pistons for more pistons. Forces associated with secondary imbalances are less apparent, especially in engines that have good quality control and equal weights of all the components of the rotating assembly, which is why often a good engine design is enough to get cylinder engine balance of the engine. Is to think of it as the big brother of the inline-3. They share the same engine balance genetics, but the inline-5 is bigger, more powerful version. Now, the result of having 5 cylinders is that we can evenly distribute crank angles along the crankshaft of an inline 5-cylinder engine. And the result is that when looking at the inline 5 crank from the front, we get this nice 5-pointed star. Just like the 3-pointed star of the inline 3, the 5-pointed star of the inline 5 is a naturally really well balanced shape. And the result is that we get a perfect secondary balance. At any one time in the inline 5 engine, each piston is in a different position of its stroke, which means that the secondary forces balance out and we have a perfect secondary balance. But again, just like the inline 3, we have an imperfect primary balance. Although we draw line of the inline 5 cylinder, we can see that the forces on one side do not equal the forces on the other side. And again, just like the inline 3, the inline 5 is front, but a longer, heavier engine with more pistons, which means that although the rocking is definitely present in real life, it's a bit less apparent in the inline 5 than in the inline 3. And again, we fix it the same way with a single balancing shaft that's rotating at the speed of the crank, because we're fixing primary forces that occur once per every full crankshaft revolution. But the inline 5-cylinder engine has a key advantage over any other engine with less cylinders. And to see this advantage, all we have to do is our firing interval calculation again. This time, of course, we're going to divide 720 by 5. The result is 144, which tells us that the inline 5-cylinder engine fires every 144 degrees of crankshaft rotation. Obviously 144 is less than 180, and if we subtract 144 from 180, this time we're going to get a negative number, minus 36. And minus 36 tells us that the inline 5 actually has a overlap of power strokes. During 36 degrees of the crankshaft rotation, 2 power strokes are actually occurring in the inline 5 engine. And although 36 degrees might not sound like a big deal, power stroke overlap is actually a big deal for engines. And in the inline 5 engine noticeably smoother than the 4-cylinder engine. Observe 6-cylinder. Is to think of it as an inline 3 standing in front of a mirror. In fact, the inline 6-cylinder engine is 2 inline 5-cylinders mirroring each other. And this means that again we have the same crankshaft shape, crank control distribution when we're looking at the crankshaft from the front. Again, we have a 3-pointed star. It's just that this time we have 2 cylinders on each end of the 3-pointed star. And the result again is the same as with the inline 3-cylinder engine, and it means perfect secondary balance. In fact, the cylinders inside inline 6 pairs. When 2 are at the top, 2 are at the bottom, and 2 are in the middle, which means that the forces associated with a secondary imbalance are actually canceling each other out, resulting in a perfect secondary balance. Also, in the case of the inline 6-cylinder engine, we have an even number of pistons, which means that any one piston mass can be cancelled out by the mass of another piston. If we draw a line across the middle of the inline 6-cylinder engine, we can see the forces on this side balance out with the forces on the other side of the line, and vice versa. So what are we looking at here exactly? Well, unlike any of our previous engine configurations, the inline 6-cylinder engine is an engine with a perfect primary and a perfect secondary balance. In fact, it's the most compact possible engine configuration with a perfect primary and secondary balance. On top of all, which means that we have an even greater power stroke overlap, which means that it's even smoother than an inline 5-cylinder engine. So when it comes to engine balance and engine smoothness, the inline 6 is a real champion. The only real drawback of this engine is that it's kind of long and you can't use it for front-wheel drive transfers mounting applications, but nobody really cares, and you just can't pay on a good inline 6-cylinder engine. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the engine balance of the most popular automotive inline engine configurations. Now you've probably noticed that I haven't talked about flat engines or V engines, or I also didn't mention the crossplane inline 4, for example, and that's because this video is actually the first in a series of videos on engine balance. And in the future videos, I want to cover every possible engine configuration. So we're going to talk about V engines, flat, yeah, pretty much every engine configuration.
Game platform or even thousands.
I don't know. So very interesting. The primary and secondary. The only thing I really like
to skip primary and secondary engine balance, or if this is your first time watching this engine balance series, you can continue watching, or you can watch the first video, which is this one in the series, for a more detailed step-by-step easy to understand explanation of primary and especially secondary engine balance. A primary engine imbalance is the result. It does this because it has to cover a. It's a beautifully simple and two cabs and only one exhaust manifold. The only real downside of an inline 6 is its length. It's very hard to fit it transfers in an engine. But the length is very hard to fit. First of all, which is not degrees, it takes a 4-stroke engine to complete one combustion cycle. By 6, which is the number of cylinders, we get 120 degrees. It tells us that the inline 6-cylinder engine fires every 120 degrees of crank rotation. If we deduct 120 from 180, we get minus 60. The minus tells us that we have 60 degrees of power stroke overlap, so that's pretty significant power stroke overlap, resulting in a very smooth engine. When it comes to balance, the inline 6 is essentially two inline 3s mirroring each other. As we know, the inline 3-cylinder engine has a imbalance in relation to its center of gravity due to its odd number of pistons. This is especially apparent every time the first or the last cylinder in the inline 3 fires. When cylinder 1 fires, for example, the downward force of piston 1 creates a reaction at the opposite end of the engine, and when piston 1 goes down, it tries to get out because when piston is doing the opposite thing of piston 1, so it cannot cancel the forces out, which means that when it's running, the inline 3-cylinder engine has a rocking moment back. And it has no issues with secondary balance. The V6 was created with the problem of the inline 6-cylinder engine, its length. A V6 is a lot shorter than an inline 6. A V6 is almost as short as an inline 3-cylinder engine, which means that fitting it transversely in an engine bay is a lot easier than fitting an inline 6 transversely in an engine bay. But the V6 has the basic problem, compactness. The first thing that it loses is the inherent primary balance of the inline 6. There's no mirroring of inline 3s. Instead, the two inline 3s are split into two banks of the V, which means that there's no cancelling out of the primary rocking moment of inline 3. Instead, the bank of the V of a V6 inherits the primary imbalance of inline 3, and to fix it, the V6 engine needs engineering aids, and they usually come in the form of balancing shafts and or crankshaft counterweights, large and heavy crankshaft counterweights, and or offset weights in the crankshaft pulley or the flywheel. But the V6 engine also needs engineering aids to have an even firing interval. In our previous engine balance video, we learned that if you split cylinders in a V configuration, you need to decide on the angle between the two banks of the V. In any V engine, the perfect bank angle is the one that enables a naturally even firing interval, and that bank angle equals the firing interval of the engine. So in the case of a V engine with 6 cylinders, such as a V6, the perfect bank angle is 120 degrees, the same as the firing interval, but a 120 degrees V6 isn't practical. It's very wide, which means it's no longer compact, which means that it neuters the compact nature and the whole purpose of a V6. It's very hard to install a 120 degrees V6 into any sort of engine bay. So instead we make a 60 degree or a 90 degree V6 or any other number of degrees that enable a more narrow bank angle, which results in a more compact engine. But there is an issue. Any V6 that doesn't have 120 degrees between the banks needs offset crank pins to have even intervals. The crank pins in a V6 crankshaft are offset by what's called a splay angle. The splay angle makes up for whatever is missing in the bank angle, and although it does complicate the crankshaft, it enables an even firing interval for the wrong bank angle. So as you can see, if it wants to be smooth like an inline 6, the V6 needs several engineering aids, but it also needs double the number of cylinder heads, double the number of cams if it is a pushrod V6, and double the number of exhaust manifolds compared to an inline 6-cylinder engine. So as you can see, the V6 achieves compactness and smoothness.
Trust.
Was 6 with the compactness of the V6 but without the double cylinder heads. How would you do that? Of course you would breed the inline 6 together with the V6, and the offspring would be called VR6. In fact, the VR actually means in German V-Reihenmotor, or literally translated, it means V inline engine. And this is exactly what the VR engine is. It inherits the genes of both of its parents, and its goal is to be as inherently balanced as an inline 6 while not being as complicated as a V6. This was the guiding principle according to which Volkswagen designed the engine. They have stuff of carbon a V6 engine. The VR6 engine is essentially a V6 engine, but it has an extremely narrow angle between the two. Volkswagen engines, that's either 10.6 or 15 degrees between the two bags. And this very narrow angle brings the cylinder so close that you can get them with a single head. When it comes to primary and secondary balance, the VR6 is almost as an inline. You would hear it's almost. Now in the VR6 we have the same firing order as in a typical inline 6. We even have an extremely similar crankshaft. The anatomy is almost the same, with the crankshaft in the VR6 of course being shorter. And because we have almost the same crankshaft, it means that we have the same pistons moving the same pairs in the VR6 and in the inline 6-cylinder engine. The difference is that a narrow little degree of separation between the backs of the VR6, which means VR6, the cylinders aren't quite all in a single line, which means that in the VR6 we do not have true cancelling out of the two inline 3s as we do in the inline 6-cylinder engine. That being said, that little angle is very narrow, which means that the VR6 is still inherently a pretty smooth engine, and it is better balanced than any generic V6 engine. This means that unlike the V6, the VR6 needs minimal engineering aids. The pistons, so you fit a single cylinder head on two banks of separated cylinders, and you need a bit of additional crankshaft counterweights to get rid of the imbalances created by the narrow angle separation between the two cylinder banks. So that means that the VR6 is a wholly critical 6-cylinder engine configuration. It's nice, but it's well, actually, no, it's not as simple as an inline 6. It's not as simple because we're fitting a single cylinder head to a bunch of cylinders that are not in a straight line. It means that the combustion chambers in that cylinder head are also not going to be in a line. This means that we're going to have a difference in length between different intake and exhaust ports. This, of course, is not a good thing. It means that different cylinders are going to have different power and torque curves, different power bands, and this, of course, results in a horrible engine. So this inherent problem of the VR6 must be fixed with engineering aids, and they come in the form of the intake and exhaust manifolds, making up for the differences in length between the intake and exhaust ports. And we also sometimes have different camshaft profiles employed for different cylinders to equalize their performance. This, of course, adds a bit of jumbo and complexity to the VR6. All that being said, from an engineering perspective, the VR6 engine is a success. It achieves its goals. It's very compact. It's in fact more compact than most V6. And you compare it to the inline 4 in terms of compact. And although it's simple as it's certainly more simple than a V6 because it has a single cylinder, the same number of tabs as an inline 6, and the same number of intake and exhaust manifolds as an inline 6. And although it's not quite as inherently well balanced as an inline 6, it's still inherently better balanced than a V6. And although it doesn't have its, as I said, from an engineering perspective, it's definitely a success.
It's how long it really takes to do that.
Our final engine configuration for today is the flat 6, or more precisely, the Boxer 6 engine. Every engine that has horizontally opposed cylinder banks is a flat engine, but in order for it to be a Boxer as well, it must have the pistons move in and out together, as you can see in this little animation. For example, the engine in Ferrari Testarossa is a flat 12, but it's not a Boxer because the connecting rods in that engine share a crank pin, its pistons do not move in and out together, hence it's only a flat 12, but not a boxer 12. However, all the flat 6 engines we hear about, like the ones made by Porsche or Subaru, are in fact boxer 6s. Now, a boxer 6, just like an inline 6, has a mirroring or cancelling out of two inline 3s. It's just that the boxer 6 does it differently. In the inline 6, we have two inline 3s in a line, but the boxer 6, we have them horizontally opposed so that they can cancel each other out. But there's a little catch with the boxer engine. In order for the pistons to move in and out together, they must each have their own crank pin, which means that the pistons in a boxer engine are not directly horizontally opposed. To have them truly directly horizontally opposing each other, we would need a very complicated connecting array, which of course would be practical for manufacturing purposes. And this offset between the pistons of a boxer engine means that the two inline 3s in boxer 6 are also offset from each other, which means that they're not canceling each other fully. But what's important is the size of the offset in relation to the size of the engine. For example, in the boxer twin engine, which is only 2 cylinders, the size of the offset is almost half the engine, which means that it creates significant imbalances. For example, BMW motorcycles have these engines in them, and you will see that when one version of in the boxer twin actually use shafts to get these imbalances. But in the boxer 6, the size of the offset is extremely small in relation to the total engine size, which means that the imbalances created by this little offset in the boxer 6 are pretty much irrelevant. So the boxer 6 is pretty much perfectly balanced because it does a lot of the cancelling out of the inline 3s, but it has another ace up its sleeve. It has a very short and a very wide crankshaft, and it can have a very wide crankshaft because its crankshaft has very small, narrow, and light counterweights, and it can afford to do this because of its horizontally opposed layout. As you might know, in an inline engine configuration, the crankshaft counterweight cannot be used to balance out the mass of the piston and the con rod. It cannot do this because while the crankshaft counterweight rotates, the piston reciprocates. This means that when they're in this position, the counterweight can indeed cancel out the mass of the piston. But as the engine rotates further, we can see that the counterweight now points in a totally different direction to the piston, which means that it cannot cancel out the mass of the piston, which means that crankshaft counterweights in inline engines actually only cancel out the mass of the crank pin and the part of the rod that is right onto the crank pin. So this is why inline 6-cylinder engines and other inline engines, for example, need relatively heavy counterweights to cancel out the mass of the crank pins. But the 5.6 engine doesn't need this. Because it's a boxer 6 engine, we have the crank pins opposed from each other horizontally at 180 degrees, which means that the crank pins in the flat 6 can actually cancel each other out. Which means that in theory you could actually make the crankshaft of a boxer 6 engine without any counterweights. Actually, Porsche did that in the past, but as you can see, modern 5.6 engines, actually all of them have crankshaft counterweights. Here's one from Porsche, here's the EZ30 from Subaru, for example. They all have counterweights. Now, they have counterweights. Counterweights in a crankshaft do a great deal in improving the longevity of the engine. They reduce the dynamic stresses and the fatigue of the engine, and they also reduce the loads on the main bearings. Now, how exactly all that works is a topic for another video, which I may cover in the future. So being able to have very small counterweights reduces crankshaft mass, which means that the flat 6 can be a very, very rev-happy engine. So speaking about crankshafts, we also must mention crankshaft length and torsional vibration. This is something where the inline 6 seems a bit of a loser because it does have the longest crankshaft, which means that it is susceptible to the most torsional vibration. Torsional vibration occurs when you apply torsion, actually when you apply a load to a shaft at a length, at a distance from some sort of resistive load. In our case, the shaft is of course our crankshaft, our load is of course the piston under combustion, and our resistive load is of course the clutch, for example. The longer the shaft, the greater the torsional vibration. This means that the inline 6 engine, which is the longest, has the longest crankshaft, is subject to the most torsional vibration. Now, you can't really feel torsional vibration outside the engine, but it can actually destroy the engine and the crankshaft. However, in our previous video where we covered inline 6, we learned that the right engineering, the right material, and the right places can definitely pretty much eliminate torsional vibration issues from modern inline 6 engines, which are capable of sustaining extremely high loads, even in the most modified of their versions. That being said, eliminating torsional vibration concerns usually means adding material, adding strength, and thus adding mass, which means that when it comes to crankshaft design, the Fiat 6 is a winner. So overall, the Fiat 6 is a winner. Well, yes, it is very balanced. Yes, it does have a very crankshaft. Of course, a price to be paid, and the Fiat 6 pays the price in being the most complex engine configuration of all the 4 engine configurations we talked about today. It's also horrible for packaging because it's very wide, and stuffing it into an engine bay is definitely not easy. When it comes to the complexity we mentioned, it does have 2 cylinder heads, 2 exhaust manifolds, complicated intake manifolds usually. It also has big complicated timing belt or timing chain arrangements. Even the engine block has to be made to pack. So it's definitely the most expensive and complex engine to manufacture, which explains why, although it is very awesome, it is a very rare engine configuration. So that's what comes to the cylinder engine configurations. I hope you enjoyed that, found it useful, and maybe even a bit entertaining. In the future, we will of course explore more engine configurations in the engine balancing series. We will also talk about backplane and crossplane stuff and much more. So if you're enjoying this, stay tuned for that as well. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the D4A channel.
So, meio, meio. Okay, so he said something very um, interesting there about how um, the horizontally opposed engine, right? The boxer engine. Horizontally opposed is the engine that um, uses. That's one of my favorite cars now. It is true that they're using that it is not 100% horizontally opposed. I was thinking about that, and I was scared, and I came up with this. Let's see. That would probably that definitely solve the problem, and it will also make it a lot smaller. Make it a lot smaller. I don't know. I wonder if anybody has ever tried it. But, I'm talking about it's so you have a piston rod, and it's not gonna look good. Um, yeah, so that. How do I? Okay, I can't fucking do this shit. But hey, what the hell is this shit? See. Anyway, it's pretty much instead of having a cap on the piston, why don't we use the other one? The other one, the other piston. I'm trying like do it in here. I gotta find out how to make them fucking things. What is this shit? Okay, so this is a fucking square. Just make a fucking whatever size I want it to be. Okay. Whatever, man. Okay. And yeah. Okay, right? Oh, so this is your typical piston uh um right here is crack whatever type you're getting. Right in the center. So what I'm thinking is get rid of this whole part, everything on there, and let me see. Um, I, I, Mhm. Okay. You would have it there. Oh, I know. en la discoteca. Turu, 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 turu. I don't know. So you got 120 beats. Hmm.